furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio, radio with bite.
Hello, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. I'm your host, Allison Tiemann, otherwise known as Typhon Blue, and with me today is my co-host, Della Burton. Later on, my co-blogger on genderaddict.com, that's gender plus erratic.com, Ginkgo, will be joining us. Tonight on Honey Badger Radio, we are doing silent call-in lines. What that means is that we will be available to take private calls on the usual call-in number. These calls won't be broadcast unless requested by the caller. In the meantime, we'll be occasionally playing pre-recorded music, rants, and ads. So if the holidays have got you feeling down or you just want to chat, please do call in. The number is 1-310-388-9709. Again, 1-310-388-9709. Before we get to receiving calls, here's some show business. A Voice for Men is doing its annual fundraiser. AVFM has made Honey Badger Radio possible by giving us a platform on Blog Talk Radio and, in the future, on Live 365. It's also hosted a rally in Toronto and will be hosting a conference in June in Detroit. Not to mention its focus on being the best source for men's rights commentary and news has meant it owns Google rankings on the subject. But all this requires moolah. So if you have a few extra shekels this holiday season, please go to avoiceformen.com and throw them into the hat. As you may know, Honey Badger Radio has a show archive for those of you who want to hear past shows. You can find it on youtube.com/user/honeybadgerradio. Go and subscribe right now. Our archive and our store can also be accessed through our website at honeybadgerbrigade.com. That's honeybadgerbrigade.com. The first pre-recorded piece that I'm going to play tonight is Shedding the Slave Skin. Shedding the Slave Skin originally aired on my channel. Say that 20 times fast. You can access my channel through the Honey Badger Radio channel on YouTube, or just go to youtube.com/user/genderaddict. That's gender plus erratic minus the extra I created a series about the dynamics between men and women titled Threat Narrative. Over about a dozen entries, I've connected threat narratives, which are basically the process of demonizing a person or group of people by emphasizing their ability to act, their invulnerability, and their bad intent, to dynamics between the gender, the rise and fall of empires, and slavery. It's pretty epic if I do say so myself. The piece I'm going to play tonight, the first piece I'm going to play, is the second in my Son of Threat Narrative series. And it deals with how psychological slavery is challenged by the slave. Now, while this pre-recorded content is playing, please feel free to call in to talk to us privately. You can ask about what you're listening to. You can tell us all about the cool things that happened to you this year, or whatever. You can request to take your call on air when the pre-recorded content ends. So without further ado, here is Son of Threat Narrative, Shedding the Slave Skin.
In my last Threat Narrative installment, I talked about the slaver's sweet spot, which was essentially a way of perpetuating slavery indefinitely by creating a slave that desires to dominate you, and through that dominance serves your benefit. Now, today I wanted to address something that I said in my previous Threat Narrative series, and that was that a system of slavery lasts as long as the slave is seen as less vulnerable than the master. Today I'm going to explain what that means. Imagine we have a guy named Stu who really, really loves Cracker Jack. Now Stu goes down to the corner store and buys himself a box of Cracker Jack. And he does this every so often just as a treat. And when he gets home and he opens up that box of Cracker Jack, he pops a bit of Cracker Jack into his mouth. And instead of that delicious salty caramel flavor, he feels a sharp jab of pain, slivering up his tooth into his jaw, into his ear, just this agonizing pain. He's broken his tooth on the Cracker Jack. Now, after Stu goes to the dentist and gets his tooth fixed and finishes his round of antibiotics and the pain is gone, guess what he's probably going to do to celebrate? He's going to go down to the corner store and get another box of Cracker Jack. Now let's imagine instead Stu opens up this box of Cracker Jack. He's just salivating at the smell of the salt and the sweet caramel corn. And he picks up a handful of it and he eats it. And 15 minutes later, he gets violently ill. I'm talking ass in the toilet, head in a bucket, violently ill. Barfing and shitting at the same time for 2 or 3 days, just violently ill from this Cracker Jack. And after he goes through, just the sickness finally eases and he goes through that week of queasy spasms that always last after you get really sick. What do you think he's going to do to celebrate? Well, he's not going to be eating Cracker Jack. In fact, he will probably avoid all food from that corner store for the rest of his life. That's the power of nausea, to cause you to avoid something. Nausea is a very powerful aversive force. And the reason why is because it keeps us alive. In the wild, if we ate something and it made us get sick, we never want to eat that again, because it might kill us if we did. Now, to understand why I'm telling you that particular anecdote, I'm going to explain what emotions are. When we're young, when we're gestating in the womb, and even for the first months of our life, our most predominant, our first sense to develop is tactility, our sense of touch. And for a long time after we're born, that's our predominant sense. Every other sense, and really our understanding of our environment and everything within it, is scaffolded on tactility. That means it reflects back to some sort of tactile experience we had. Now, what shame is an abstraction off of nausea. Shame is essentially a powerful incentive to avoid something that could get us killed. And to explain what I'm saying, you have to understand that human beings are very vulnerable creatures. We have no claws, we can't run very fast, we have no sharp teeth, we have no horns or hooves to defend ourselves. We are essentially at the mercy of the wild unless we're capable of maintaining a sense of belonging within a group. So what shame is a way of an incentive to remove a behavior that could get us cast out of the group. And shame overrides even our sense of self-preservation because it is a part of our sense of self-preservation. If we can't retain access to our group, we're most likely going to die. So shame is a very powerful aversive force, in many ways even more powerful than pain. It's just as powerful as nausea. So in our psyche, there's the self, which is sort of a continuous experience of who we are. Right? It's the person who's tasting the Cracker Jack. It's the person who's getting sick. It's the person whose tooth really hurts. It's a continuous experience of who we are. But then there's our belief about our self-value, and that can be called ego. Ego can be broken up into two aspects, innate value and earned value. Both of these aspects are granted by the group, but innate value cannot be taken away by your actions. It just is. It reflects the group's value of some quality that you're born with. Now, when we're shamed by the group, we shift out of our experience of self into the earned value aspect of our ego. When we're in the earned value aspect of our ego, we take on the group's appraisal of us and attempt to earn our value by removing whatever offending behavior that we had. And in healthy groups, this is a very important process because there are people who will have behaviors that are toxic, often not just to the group, but also to themselves. And usually a healthy group will say, Stu, you have innate value to us, but this behavior has to go because it's toxic to us and the group and to yourself. Stu, go off, deal with this. When you've dealt with it, you can come back. No questions asked, no blame placed. Just you need to deal with it. Please come back as soon as you have. That's a healthy group. But what if the group tells Stu that it isn't his behavior that's the problem? It's Stu himself. The group is effectively shaming Stu for being Stu, but Stu can't get rid of being Stu because he is Stu. So what happens then? When that happens, the person who's being shamed for something that he can't change will spend the rest of his life attempting to vomit up something he can't get rid of, his innate being. Now this is exactly as excruciating as it sounds. And in that situation, those individuals who have been shamed by saying that they have no innate value to the group, or even that their innate value is dangerous and damaging to the group, they will search for something to value. Those lacking value will search for something of value. For the obvious reason is if you have nothing to value in your life, it's empty and meaningless. But there's another reason to it. When you have nothing of value in your life, you're essentially skinless. If you have nothing of value, then you have nothing to lose. If you have nothing to lose, nothing can give you pain. But then again, nothing can give you pleasure either. Skin is, what this skin that these people are seeking is boundaries. When a person who's part of this shamed group goes through this process of having this innate part of their being shamed to the point where they're constantly trying to essentially vomit it out of themselves, of course they can't, what ends up happening is that they vomit themselves out of their own skin. And that's exactly as excruciating as it sounds. And this is why when a member of the slave class, a member of the shamed class, has no value to serve, that slave, well, he has a tendency to put a gun under his chin and pull the trigger. And that person is going to live permanently in the earned value aspect of his ego. And he's going to be addicted to pride because pride gives him the false impression that he's managed to vomit up his own entrails, his own inner being. It's also why a member of the shamed class orientates himself to the first suitable threat narrative he can find. Threat narratives serve the shamed class, the slave class, as a skin that they can put on and feel like they have some sort of containment, some sort of sense of purpose and belonging, boundaries. And this process is what weaponizes a threat narrative. On its own, a threat narrative is merely boundaries. When a threat narrative is populated by slave cells that will kill or die in its service, that's when a threat narrative becomes deadly. Now, this desire to take on a set of vulnerabilities created by something of value, this need for that, this need for a skin, creates an economy. This economy, and I'll call it the shame economy, this economy is controlled exclusively by the master class. In fact, it could also be called the master economy, since all other economies answer to it. All other economies serve the shame economy. Despite its ultimate supremacy over all other economies, it's hidden in plain sight. And it's hidden by interconnecting layers of psychological blind spots. The first and most important of which is the belief that the slave class is more powerful than the master class. This belief not only hides the shame economy, it drives it. Again, you have to have value to have vulnerabilities. If you have no value, you have no vulnerabilities, you have nothing to lose. That's why the slave is seen as more powerful than the master, because the slave is seen as having no vulnerabilities, because they have no value. In the Slavery Sweet Spot, I explained that in a system of slavery, a master is seen as the source of the slave's belonging, while the slave has a desire to relieve his sense of powerlessness through dominance. When the slave's desire to belong to his master is in balance with his desire to dominate her, you get the perfect slave. In this situation, the master's vulnerabilities offer the slave the opportunity to relieve his sense of powerlessness. His master's vulnerabilities also offer the slave a way of getting into a skin so he can relieve the excruciating feeling of being skinless. For obvious reasons, if the slave sees himself as more vulnerable, the system stops working. In fact, the slave will resist this outcome. In fact, the slave will resist this outcome because it means the loss of his drug, pride. Pride being that illusionary belief that a slave has finally vomited out whatever society doesn't like about him, which is impossible because you cannot vomit out the thing that is doing the vomiting. And because it's this pride in serving his master's vulnerabilities that the slave is after, this is his primary drive as a slave, is pride. Pride to soothe the powerlessness. Pride to soothe that nausea, give a break from the shame. A slave will want to retain his belief that his master is delicate, submissive, and weak because that ensures a constant supply of vulnerability to serve, while hiding the slave's powerlessness from view. The Hollywood fiction is that the slave serves the master with a simmering resentment in his heart. The reality is that most slaves were eager to serve. The reality is the system of slavery honors the slave mind. This was their life. The slaves are almost more invested in perpetuating the system of slavery than the master is, because the system of slavery gives them what they have now been created to crave. Ironically, in this system, in the slave system, in the system where there's a shamed class and a master class, the master's weakness is her wealth. And you'll see situations in which members of a master class compete to create displays of weakness and also displays of value. In some cases, with their displays of weakness, with the master class's displays of weakness, they will go so far as to alter their bodies to appear more vulnerable. In the shame economy, the master's vulnerability is currency. It's currency because the slave wants it more than life itself. Shame and vulnerability is, in fact, the basis of all currency: political, economic, social, religious, and even military. So why does a system of slavery exist only as long as the master is seen as more vulnerable than the slave? Because when slaves start to recognize their vulnerability, they begin the process of shedding the master's skin and growing their own.
And we're back. Once again, tonight is a silent call-in night, so if you have something you want to talk to us privately, feel free to call in. The number is 1-310-388-9709. Alternatively, if you want to chat on air and bring up some burning issue that you feel everybody needs to hear about, call in and we'll take you on air. The number again is 310-388-9709. I'm going to take California Guy. Hello, California Guy. You are on air.
Oh, hello, Typhon.
Hi.
I loved your threat narrative. That reminds me of I remember this comment, I think under Karen's blog spot called Owning Your Own Shit, where she did this old video on why men weren't marrying, and I remember there was like this, I think, maybe they were transsexual, I don't know, but according to her, when she heard about innate value and those that don't have innate value, which would be men, it's when according to her, it started to make sense why maybe transsexual, female to male transsexuals, were probably more accepted than male to female transsexuals, because those male to female transsexuals don't have innate value, like that women who are born women have. So, yeah, I was thinking to bring that up. That's probably part of the reason why, or why people are more okay with like masculine women and feminine men. That's what your threat narrative sort of reminded me of, if it makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. It's like we are more comfortable in the past where there was aristocracy. We'd be more comfortable with an aristocrat, rolling up their sleeves and getting in the dirt with the peasants than we would be a peasant walking around pretending to be an aristocrat. In fact, there were laws against that. If for example, there were some very, very wealthy merchants, and they would have sumptuary laws in which they would prevent merchants from using their wealth to acquire garments that were of the same quality that should be reserved for aristocrats. So there were laws against people presenting themselves as being aristocrats, as being capable of wearing the finery of an aristocrat. And but the other way around, it's sort of a quirk, right? You don't really complain that much if an aristocrat wants to dress like a peasant and do the bucolic slumming thing. It's just an eccentricity. But if a peasant wants to dress as an aristocrat, you better slap him in irons because he's going above his station. And that's really, there's actually a commentator on my blog named Shayla. Oh, I can never get her name right, but she is a trans woman, and she actually pointed that out, the sumptuary laws, and how you get punished for going above your station and not punished for going below your station. In fact, it can be considered, you become a man of the people. But yeah, that's, I think, the same kind of attitude that you're seeing. And I don't think calling it femophobia and then saying, no, it's really women who are oppressed quite captures the dynamic.
Right. Before I even learned all of this, I thought it seems like, men making fun of feminine men is maybe because they think women are inferior. But now it's easy to see. After learning this actually makes a whole lot more sense than feminists saying, it's because men think women are inferior, and that's why they make fun of feminine men, that kind of bull crap.
Well, it feels like in those societies where there were sumptuary laws, peasants would make fun of other peasants who are putting on airs all the time. And it's an interesting situation when you're in a lower class. Often there's several things that happen psychologically. You actually express a lot of hatred towards people within your class who pretend to a higher class. Because it's a situation where what gives them the right? What gives them the right to do that? And I can't. And it becomes this almost this incredible taboo that you're even willing to enact violence against somebody who breaks it. And you also get this when someone when someone is going above their station, and you get angry at them because, again, why do they have the right and why can't I don't do it. I understand my position in life. Why can't this other guy over here understand that this is inappropriate to do? And that explains a lot of the anger. And the other thing is it also challenges the sense of identity. So when a peasant, because the aristocratic identity sort of is much more powerful, peasants can become very possessive. People in a lower class, in a lower group, can become very possessive of their identity and feel like their identity as this group of people has to be policed and protected against this more powerful identity. You see that with groups like, for example, people who have been colonized. They will become very possessive of their native identity because they feel like it's under attack by a more powerful identity.
Right.
On the other hand, the people who are colonizing them, the cultures that are colonizing them, will often be, they'll pick and choose. They'll be like, oh yes, I'm going to dress like a native today, and it's no big deal, right? You can walk around and do that because you are the more powerful identity. You don't have to feel the threat that you'll lose it, because everything in your society promotes and enforces your powerful sense of identity. Whereas if you have a less powerful sense of identity, you have to police it more to get that to feel like it's real. And I think that's what's happening with men. Women can dabble with masculine traits, and then if they like some masculine endeavor, like if they like some masculine hobby or some masculine career, they'll just take it over, and kick men out. And guys are aware of that, so they're now constantly in a situation where their identities are more fragile, so they tend to police them more.
That's true.
To maintain that sense that they even have an identity. So does that help answer your question?
Yes. My question would be, I remember, what do you call it? I'm sorry. It's just I'm a little nervous because I feel like I'm talking to a celebrity here. Take it as a compliment.
Where? Who? Wait. There's a celebrity on the line. I didn't realize. Did you bring on a celebrity, James? James is our producer. Shit. Maybe I should get my. Oh my goodness! I should be very careful. Oh no, I'm nervous. Who is this person?
Okay. The question is, the thing is that what makes people, part of the reason that makes people so can be so protective of women, is because they're more neotenous. Most of you resemble more like children than men, for example. That this is what I've learned too. I've learned is that that's part of the reason. It's like women you tend to be viewed as objects and men as agents, right? So of course when a man, how can I put it? So people are more willing to believe that a man, men can hurt women in relationships and rape and all that. Now, the thing that I find interesting and strange, though, is that when it's a woman hurting another woman, it seems to be taken much less seriously. In fact, the domestic violence industry, for example, the only domestic violence they ever seem to recognize is, man, perpetrator, woman, victim, right? But, of course, this is supposed to be about helping women, but they never talk about, but lesbians who are in violent relationships with other women seem to be ignored, or they seem to, I notice that people on YouTube seem to downplay it like they do with female versus male violence. So, I guess my question would be, and also female on female rape. It seems to be like male on female rape is the most taken seriously, while male to male rape, okay, people believe it, but it's taken less seriously. Then female on male rape, that's, much more taken less seriously. And then, of course, female on female rape is like you bring that up and all you get is hushed voices. So, or people ignore it. So my question is that it seems that women, even with their innate value, if it's another woman hurting, that seems to be totally ignored. So I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say. Is like, am I getting, if what I'm seeing here is right, or is there something I'm not seeing here, or because that's what it seems like. Like I don't know, trying to make sense, but yeah.
Okay. Well, if I can answer your last question here, you're accurate in your observations. The reality is that we are very comfortable with the idea that men are actors and that women are acted upon. I wouldn't say that they're exactly objects, because we're fascinated by women's emotional reactions to things and very concerned about women's emotional reactions to things. We tend not to be very concerned about objects' emotional reactions to things because, well, for one, we don't think they have them. So it's not, when you say that women are objectified, that's not exactly accurate. It's something else that's going on. It's women are subjectified. In other words, they're seen as acted upon, yes, but we also see their subjective experiences of being acted upon as being valid and important to address. And again, the male acting upon the female is our most comfortable social dichotomy, like social concept. Please interrupt me if you don't understand something I'm saying. But essentially, when we see a man acting on a woman, so the man is the actor, the woman is acted upon, that's really comfortable for us. That's our comfort zone. That's how we see the world. When men act, women are acted upon. Now, when we get into the other abuse dyad, it becomes far less comfortable to us. When men are abusing other men, it's possibly the most comfortable to us aside from men abusing women. In terms of, it doesn't rub up against our social concepts of male and female. But when men abuse men, of course, we have a man who's acted upon. But because we don't actually really conceive of men as being acted upon, it in some ways it becomes almost funny. It's like a joke. You know, a lot of humor is really about transgressing what we expect. So when a guy looks like he's being acted upon, it's just sort of funny. You know, it's like chop his dick off. It's hilarious. Because the guy is obviously being acted upon, and how is that even possible? Because men can't be acted upon. Ha 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 ha. And so the male acting upon the male is probably the next one that's less comfortable, except extremely funny to us. You know, it's hilarious to society that men are hurt. It's just hilarious. That's why you can see a video and it's just guys getting kicked in the crotch. And for some reason, that's funny. Really, it just a guy getting kicked in the crotch, just a guy being physically assaulted in a way that could result in death or sterility. Hilarious, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then so that dyad to us is less uncomfortable because it's still a man acting, but it's acting on another man. And because we can't see men as being acted upon, that becomes sort of funny. Now, as you go down the list, these dyads of abuser and abusee become less and less understandable. I would say the most confusing is female actor, male acted upon in situations where women are abusing men, women are raping men, women are physically hurting men. This people will look at it and they don't understand it. It just slides off the plate of their mind like so much spaghetti. And then when we get to female abusing female, and again we get that cognitive dissonance because it's a woman acting, you know, the woman being acted upon. Yeah, we're concerned, but because it's a woman acting, we just don't know how to deal with it. It's just like, it doesn't necessarily become funny. It can be fetishized, you know, lesbian rape, it's a good rape, that kind of thing. But it's definitely not something we can really parse very easily, so we want to try to make it conform to the way we understand the world. For example, in the Congo, women who were subject to sexual violence by soldiers reported, or women who were subject to sexual violence, essentially went to the Congo in these war-torn areas and they interviewed survivors of sexual violence. The women who were subject to it reported that 40% of the rapists who had raped them were female. And it's like, how do you parse that? Like, it's people just don't and their obvious go-to answer is patriarchy, right? Because patriarchy is sort of the stopgap. A woman rapes another woman, and we say, well, the patriarchy must have made her do it. And then we go back to making the whole concept more comfortable because suddenly it's really a man acting on a woman to make her act on another woman. Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually it does. I remember someone said, maybe it was Karen too, she said that society, they don't want to accept how that women could act this way, or they think, you know, when it's a woman acting upon a man, you know, people can easily excuse it, like, oh, well, maybe he did something, or maybe something they try to make excuses for her, but it's like people have a harder time trying to think, okay, what if it's a woman doing it to another woman? Then it's like, then it seems like the society has a harder time with that, because you can't make. How do you make up excuses for something? For
something
because
that hurts women.
Yeah.
So that's essentially what it is. It's more uncomfortable because you're making excuses about something that hurts women. Well, they do it. I mean, if you look at feminist explanation, bargaining with patriarchy, they definitely make their mental gymnastics and logical leaps to try to explain how a woman is really acted upon when she's raping another woman with a beer bottle or something. It's they do it. They manage it. And I think actually that's one of the reasons why they're so financially and politically successful, is that they help people explain all these situations that are basically inexplicable to the average person, because I don't understand. A woman is acting. A woman is acting upon a man. How? What? That's incomprehensible. You might as well be showing them like a tear in the fabric of space and time. It confuses the fuck out of them. And feminism trots along and explains, no, really, actually, this is patriarchal bargaining by the woman. She's actually being acted upon by a larger and amorphous man that infuses everything in the universe and controls it through masculine potency. And that's how the woman is really acted upon. And you can see how very acted upon she is when she's cutting up her boyfriend into little itty bits and burying him in the backyard. We can see that the more she acts, the more she's acted upon by patriarchy, and that helps people. They're like, oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, of course, there's a fundamental patriarchal force that governs all human interactions. I think physicists should get on that and find the patriarchy particle. I got a little bit whimsical here, but I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that helped a lot. It's I don't even know what to say to it. I mean, that's just, it's insane how people are so controlled by their instincts. I mean, this is I guess the only explanation is that it's instincts. Why people, the sad thing is feminists don't even have to make sense, apparently, for people to agree with them. So this is what it seems like.
Well, I don't know if it's instincts as much as the reality is instincts is sort of abdicating responsibility and changing it. Now, it could be instincts or it could be something natural, but there are a lot of natural things that we don't just, roll over and say, hey, well, we can't do anything about it, Like take dying in childbirth, perfectly natural. And in fact, you could argue that if you just let women die who can't properly give birth, then you're improving the species. So there you go. But we don't do that. I mean, there may be a vulnerability that men have to not eliciting the same kind of compassion as women, and it's all perfectly natural. But it really should be as morally abhorrent to indulge in that kind of behavior, not feeling compassion for men, as it is just saying, okay, well, women need to give birth alone in a hut because we want to weed out the bad breeders. And we don't do that, and yet childbirth is natural.
Right, or rape, we can't say, well, rape is natural, that's how a lot of sex in nature is rough, and, they're animal rapists. Well, I guess, since some men feel like they need to rape, propagates genes, I guess we should accept it, but of course we shouldn't. We can't, we should, do that, so.
Well, we sort of already accept rape as long as it's women raping men, but yeah. We don't make that naturalistic argument for other situations, very in particular situations where women sort of lose out in the whole scheme or equation. So I don't see why we need to look at the situation, even if it is natural, and look at it and say, well, it's natural, therefore we have to accept it. Bullshit. That's
right.
That's not a justification.
No, it's not. It's just, evolution gave us this brain of ours, and we should use it. That's we should use it. See, well, you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So
we should use it to improve everyone's lot. And that's part of being human, is that we don't have the tendency. Other animals, someone gets, or an animal gets weak, the other animals eat them. We don't do that. We take care of the people who are vulnerable. That's a very human trait. And it's also a trait in wolves, but we won't go there. So it's a human trait to take care of the vulnerable. The problem is that we don't recognize male vulnerability. And even if it's sort of an instinctive thing not to recognize male vulnerability, that doesn't mean we have to be defined by it. We figure out a workaround.
Right.
Okay, anyway, it was great chatting with you, California guy. We do have other callers who want to come on the air, so please do call in again in the future, and thank you for your call. All right,
thank you.
I'm going to bring on Evan. Evan, you're
Hello?
on the air. Hi.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Hi, I just wanted to talk about really feminism, elitism in the feminist community. And one of the things that I wanted to bring this on is I was rereading a book I had to read for college called Half the Sky, Turning Oppression into Opportunity for Women Worldwide by Nicholas Kristof and Shirley Rudin. It's actually a very interesting book. And towards the end of the book, they talk about what it's about is about women being oppressed in the developing world. And it's really heart-wrenching, horrible stuff. And one of the things that they need to, the authors put in the back just ways that the situation for these women can be improved. And one of the things they said is that feminism needs to be, in the West, needs to be less parochial. And it rings so true to me, because when I think about big feminist outrages, particularly of this year, I think of women a bunch of wealthy middle-class white women complaining about men asking them to have coffee with them in an elevator, women being totally unhappy with the decision two men were having out of her presence at a tech convention, and women talking about just how bitching about their portrayals in video games. It's just like these women, it's like they don't care about women, about people being sold into slavery in Phnom Penh, women being raped at high noon in India. It's like they don't care about these women who are suffering all over the world. It's more about their comfort level in basically this ivory tower they set up for themselves in the West. And I don't understand, through this massive feminist war chest, how come they don't get more play about women being oppressed in the developing world? Is it that they don't care, or is it that their focus is making sure the wealthy white women are comfortable in Canada and the U.S.?
Well, if you want me to answer that, there's some. I would contest some of what you're saying, but I'll answer your question first of all. It's not really about. It's not really about helping women as a group or minorities or other ethnicities. It's really about cultivating the power of victimhood in feminism. And like any other colonial power, white feminism simply extracts the resources it wants from less empowered groups. That's what they're doing. So, for example, they will shut down the conversation about men's issues in the West by describing something that happens in the third world. And they don't do anything about the thing that happens in the third world. They're just using it like a resource to manipulate the conversation in the way that they want. So it's essentially the same as extracting any other resource. If they were taking diamonds or oil or slaves, it would be much more physical representation. But what they're taking is outrage. They're mining the outrage of these events in order to manipulate the situation in the West to their benefit. And like I said, like any other colonial power, they take what they want, and they don't really offer anything in return.
Is it, like you said, is it really, I don't want to accuse them of racism because I don't think they inwardly think of it as racism, but you mentioned like it's colonialism, which can be in a lot of ways based on racism. Do you think there is some racism in the feminist community that sort of plays into this?
Yeah. One, yes, there's racism that plays into it, and two, there is no discussion about women's responsibilities in feminism. So why would there be a discussion about white women's responsibilities to people of other ethnicities? I mean, it's a lot of feminism is basically about shutting that down, about ignoring the history of women. Well, you know, like it's not just white women. It's a history of women in power, using that power to hurt other ethnicities, other races, other religions. I mean, feminism pretty much shuts that all down. So we don't talk about, you know, for example, the fact that white women, it's like I've heard this from black guys, you know, that in the past white women would rape black men easily. All they have to do is say, you know, fuck me, or I tell you that you raped me. Right? There is sexual violence inflicted on black men, and that's like almost taboo. It's taboo right now to say that we can't acknowledge that kind of thing. And a lot about feminism is really about taking the conversation. It's about nullifying. It's about squashing the conversation of women's responsibilities, specifically white women's responsibilities. So I'm not surprised that you know, feminists are taking these problems in the third world and just using it, mining them for their own benefit. It's you look at feminism, it is almost entirely extremely wealthy white women, and it's always been that way, because the only women that really had time to engage in feminist activism in the 60s and 70s were women whose husbands could afford for them to stay home.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a very privileged position that, you know, throughout history, women, a lot of poor, disadvantaged women of other races and other ethnicities, not talking about the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant women, they had no ability to have that kind of free time. So they were working.
Yeah.
You know, it was a privilege to be able to sit at home and do whatever you wanted with your time, which incidentally, being able to just manage your own time is the reason why many groups of people, you see scientific innovations coming out of groups of people who are sort of a leisured class, so they can pursue their interests. So the reality is that being given a large amounts of free time is a blessing, and being liberated from work is a blessing. And where you see other groups of people being liberated in work from history, you see lots of innovations coming. They use that time wisely. And yet, what did women do when they were liberated? White, wealthy women do when they were liberated? They used it to bitch some more.
I understand. I guess two things. One, I guess whenever I'm involved in these issues regarding feminism, I guess I understand your point that it's about cultivating power, not about genuinely helping women. I guess it's just like me trying to, like, I guess I have it drummed into me just over the years, hearing about feminism is about helping women. I guess it's just some kind of deprogramming kind of thing I have to go into when I think about these discussions. And you mentioned, I don't mean to sound like confrontational or disrespectful by any means, you said you would contest some of the things I said in my opening rant. I was just wondering, what is it that you'd contest? Because I'm open to correction by all means, if you would be kind enough just to mention what those would be.
Well, first of all, when you look at the situation of women in the third world, have you looked at the situation of boys and men in the third world?
I would not really. It was for a school thing, and that's the only reason why I really read this book.
Yeah, it's like you cannot, first of all, do not fall into the trap of looking at only one side and saying that this is the whole story. It's not.
Okay. Men
and boys in the third world also suffer incredible depredations. I mean, there are boys, you know, at the age of 7 or 9 are expected to become soldiers. And, for example, suicide bombers. These young men, these boys, in many cases very young boys, they're brainwashed to do what they do, to see their only worth in blowing themselves up. for a cause. And not only are they brainwashed, they're gang raped. You know,
Really?
there's huge rates. Yes, there's huge rates of sexual violence against men and boys in these countries, in the Middle East, in Africa, in India. Huge rates. In fact, in India, there's more sexual violence against boys than there is against girls. And this is something that they don't bring up. Like these statistics, they don't talk about them. And so when you're looking at these isolated incidents, you know, gang rapes of women, it's tragic. There's no doubt about it. But it doesn't. What people are using it, they're making political hay out of it instead of actually addressing the situation that it comes out of. And as I got into an argument on a YouTube channel, you would do better to address the epidemic of child sexual abuse of Indian boys in India, to try to capture the minority, the thin minority, like the small minority of boys who go on to grow up to become rapists. And it's a minority of abused boys who do this, a minority. But to help them, to help abused boys, you would do more to intervene, to help abused boys. That would do more to prevent any kind of rape epidemic than shaming men for their sexuality, than using this to enact draconian laws, or even really hypocritical feminists using this stuff to strip boys of their protections against being sexually violated. Because feminists in India prevented a law on sexual assault being made gender neutral so that it would protect boys. Yes, they actually prevented that from happening. And
that's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. These people are making political hay out of this stuff, and they're doing stuff that is not going to prevent women from being raped. The only thing that would prevent that, would start to reduce the amount of rape, is a holistic approach that includes men being acted upon, men and boys as victims, and includes services to them. And you don't get that if you don't look at the situation of men and boys in the third world, which is what this literature does not do. As a matter of course, it just presents these horrible stories about girls and doesn't present the other side. It doesn't present the child soldiers. Doesn't present the amount of forced labor that men end up in the third world. I mean, in Asia, I know for a fact the majority of human trafficking is men being trafficked for forced labor. You know, there's these horrendous things that are happening to men that they get no play. And part of the real problem is that all of this is a situation that comes about in poverty. So these feminist NGOs will go in and say the solution is feminism, which lines their pockets. But the reality is that you cannot give women freedom when in a dangerous country, because that will increase the rate at which women die. I mean, if you look at Muslim nations, we talk about the burqa, but the burqa is a highly visible marker of femininity that you can see from half a mile away. You know, and if you look at the statistics in regards to the violence in the Middle East, the more a sniper or a soldier or a bomber, like a combatant, the more control a combatant has over the target of his or her violence, the more they can control the target, where their violence goes and who it ends up hitting, the more likely they are to choose a man. So, for example, a bomber, you know, with bombs where there's almost no ability to choose the target, it's closer to half male and half female. When you get to snipers, you're starting to look at like 80%, 90% male. Then you get even more control over the target, like kidnappers, 95, 99% male. Torture, 99% male. At each stage, the more control a combatant has over the target of their violence, the more likely they are to choose a man in the Middle East. And that results in statistics that show that men are like 5 times more likely to die violent deaths than women. And in a society like that, how can you give women freedom? Because
I'm sorry. So that that statistic on the Tumblr feed, 31 Reasons to be a Feminist, that when they say that it's more dangerous to be a woman than it is to be a soldier in a violent conflict, that just isn't true?
Yeah, it's bullshit.
Interesting. I really do also want to thank you guys because this has been very, very enlightening listening to you and Karen.
Like,
and your,
if you want, I can show you the statistics of violent death in the world. In most places, it's 3 to 5 times higher for men. The idea that a woman is more in danger than a male combatant is unsupportable. I mean, did they give their evidence or their source for that?
No, absolutely not. I mean, they didn't because that list, what it basically was basically 31. It was basically, I think it was 33 or 31 reasons why you need to be a feminist, and it was TJ, the Amazing Atheist, did a great video on this. You should really look at his video because he could probably articulate all the problems with that list more than I could. It was just a ridiculous list, and it was pedantic. It was banal. It was basically everything I dislike about the modern feminist movement in the West, and basically probably everything you dislike about the modern feminist woman in the West. It was just a ridiculous list, and I wish I could have more information on that. But the only thing I could say is go see TJ's video on that list, and he would probably be able to articulate all the problems on that list better than I could.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, except if you don't like if somebody says something like that, I would suggest researching it because it's most likely bullshit.
Okay.
I mean, you don't have to take my word for it. In fact, you should probably go to a site called Gendercide. I believe it's gendercide.org. Let me do a quick check on that. Yeah, it's gendercide.org. Go to gendercide.org and see how often men are exclusively targeted for wide-scale violence. Like just exclusively
for men. You're talking about. This looks like this would be a very good resource for me. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yes, and thanks for your call.
Hello?
Okay. Oh yeah, you're here, still here. If you want to say, did you have anything more you wanted to talk about at all?
Python Blue, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me? Oh, it looks like I'm having a problem. Hello?
Hello?
Blog Talk.
Thank you for having me on. Have a nice evening.
Yeah. Goodness. Just having a little bit of some sound issues, but we will keep moving on. All right. So if you want to call in, tonight we're having silent lines. That means you can call in and you can talk to us privately, or you can call in and have your whatever you have to say broadcast over to everyone who's listening. And if you want to do that, please call in on 310-388-9709. That's 310-388-9709. Right now I'm going to queue up another pre-recorded bit. This is also from my Son of Threat narrative series. It's called The Master Always Wins.
It's well known that in gambling, the house always wins. The house plays on our psychological failings, our inability to abandon money we've already lost, our extremely poor risk assessment, and our preference for seeing successes rather than failures and wanting to associate ourselves with success. So instead of just another loser on the floor losing our money, we are almost at the point of winning. Not only does the house always win, but the master does as well. Now, the reality is, in a system of slavery, the freed slaves, the body of freed slaves, actually ends up supporting the system of slavery. And here's why. When a group of people is turned into a slave class, they're given a desire to dominate. That desire to dominate, when manifested towards the master class, manifests as a desire to be the master class's hero. But that desire for dominance can also manifest towards the slave class. Now, because members of the slave class aren't seen as a source of belonging, a slave's desire to dominate manifests towards another slave with violence and often extremely sociopathic behavior. Understanding that, let's look at the slave who's figured out slavery for what it is, or thinks he has, and has decided to cease serving the master. When you have a group of freed slaves, they take pride in having freed themselves from the system. They take pride in being better than the slaves who still serve. As such, they don't have a strong impulse to remove the system of slavery, because not being part of it is what they take their pride from. Why would they? I mean, how could you feel pride for being a slave who doesn't serve if you don't have a body of slaves who are serving to feel better than? So psychologically, they have no impulse to destroy this system of slavery, because this system of slavery is still the system by which they take their sense of pride, their sense of being better than other slaves. And they've constructed this belief system in which they have become better by not serving, but they still need the slaves who are serving to feel better than. In fact, there's a strong psychological impulse to ignore them completely, to see them as weak and useless, to just see yourself as superior to them for not being bamboozled into serving. Now, if the freed slave group isn't overtly maintaining the original slave structure, they are covertly. They are covertly maintaining the original slave structure by shaming the slaves who are in it, by saying you're weak-minded, you're foolish, you're pathetic. How could you be so stupid to be cheated by the master like this? By shaming the slaves who are still part of the slave structure, they're actually maintaining that slave structure. Because in shaming them, they're going to cause those slaves to push back and say, no, it's you who are shameful because you are not serving the master. The freed slaves are actually creating a psychological pressure to keep the captive slaves in line by shaming them. Because in order to remove himself from the captive slave structure, a captive slave would have to decide that he was no longer interested in the belonging that the master represents, which in and of itself is an enormous hurdle to get over, but also decide that he is going to walk down a hierarchy that he has spent probably his whole life trying to climb. Walk through a field of shaming slung at him by the captive slaves who are watching him walk away, but also by the freed slaves who are mocking him for being so stupid for so long. He has to walk through this minefield of shaming to get to another hierarchy that he then has to climb, the freed slave hierarchy, which he then has to climb. This entire process, this chasm created by shaming between the freed slave hierarchy and the captive slave hierarchy, ensures that the only slaves who ever walk that chasm are going to be ones who are deeply damaged by the captive slave hierarchy. Damaged to the point where they can no longer maintain a connection to it, because nobody else would dare make that journey across that chasm. No, only an idiot would, or someone who was so deeply damaged that they had no other choice. So by exerting a negative pressure on the captive slave hierarchy, the freed slave hierarchy maintains it. And it gets even worse. Because the Hollywood fiction is that slaves were kept in line by the master with whips and chains. Well, the reality is that when whips and chains were used, they were more often than not applied by other slaves. And this is where that whole thing that I originally said comes in, this idea that when
this slave who has experienced this immense powerlessness, he seeks out situations to dominate others to relieve his powerlessness. Of course, with the master, because the master is the source of the slave's belonging, he will dominate her by serving her benefit, by being her hero. But with other slaves, because he doesn't share a sense of belonging with them, he will dominate them brutally. When whips and chains were used, they were most often used by other slaves on slaves. The Hollywood reality is that the whip coming out was some horrifying event for slaves. No. There would have been slaves lining up to use the whip to beat another slave to death. And they would have done it to an audience of cheering slaves. Because for a moment, the slave doing the beating and the audience would get to feel a relief from his sense of powerlessness. And to be quite frank, because his threat narrative was entirely determined by the master's benefit, he doesn't see the slave that he's beating to death as a person. He sees him as a combination of Hitler, Pol Pot, and that xenomorph alien that Ripley fought. When it's slaves violently dominating each other, again, the master wins. It prevents her vulnerability from being questioned if she's not directly involved in violence against slaves. And she can excuse the violence as saying, well, it's slaves on slaves, so that's not my fault. It's not really anything to do with me. She's partly removed from it, so she does not have to take direct responsibility for the violence. It's slaves doing it to slaves. And in fact, in a well-developed system of slavery, most of the violence will be slave on slave. There will be very little master on slave violence necessary because the master will always have slaves eager to do violence to other slaves. And of course, she doesn't have to take responsibility for it because she's not doing the direct violence. And it also encourages slaves not to see each other as a source of belonging, but a source of continual threat, which again, the master wins. And so in every situation, the master wins. The master even wins when a slave hits a jackpot. Because in hitting a jackpot, that slave will keep the other slaves grinding those levers. In part because they do not want to identify with the losers around them grinding levers. They would rather identify with the slave winning. And in part because if they have to leave their levers, they have to acknowledge that they're never going to win. And they can't do that. They have to acknowledge that the system they're losing in this system. And they're not going to do that because that is another hit of powerlessness. And they're already reeling for the rest of their life under the first one. So this is how the master always wins, by playing slave psychology against itself. Even in the situation where a few slaves manage to free themselves, because they're still acting in the slave mind, they're simply going to reinforce slavery. Just like the Janissaries, who enacted a coup on the Turkish Empire, but instead of dismantling it and giving its riches to their Christian kin, they just installed another sultan. Even a bad slave is still a slave. In order to end the system of slavery, somehow you have to get around the fact, no matter what you do, the house always wins. And the only way to do that is to figure out how to turn that trickle of slaves who are so damaged they end up with a master who's basically a psychopath, or they end up in a situation where they realize that they're never going to get the belonging they need from their master, or the situation of slavery is so untenable that they can't stand it anymore. And you have to take that trickle and you have to turn it into a torrent somehow. And the reality is that the freed slave group, the freed slave hierarchy, is one of the things that maintains that trickle as a trickle and prevents it from becoming a torrent. That chasm of shaming that a slave who wants to be freed or is thinking about it has to go through is one of the biggest obstacles towards him actually leaving the slave construct. The reality is that when slaves use shame, when they use shame on each other, the house always wins. So what you have to create, instead of a captive slave construct or a freed slave construct, is a no-slave construct. And somehow you have to take that trickle
and you have to construct some sort of aqueduct system to turn it into a torrent in order to get past the fact that the house always wins.
And we're back. That was The Master Always Wins, the third installment in my Son of Threat Narrative series. If you're interested in hearing more Son of Threat Narrative, you can hear it at my channel, YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/user/genderatic. That's gender plus erratic without the extra . Anyway, as I promised in the beginning of the show, my co-blogger at genderatic.com, Ginkgo, is joining us. I'm going to pull him onto the stage and see you're live, Ginkgo.
Yes, I'm live.
Hello, you're live. Yeah, you're live. So
Hello.
Welcome to the show, and thank you for coming on and joining me tonight on my radio show. Me and Ginkgo have been blogging together since I believe November of 2011, and it's been quite a trip.
Mm-hmm.
Long and fascinating. Blogging together on gender issues. If you want to see Ginkgo's writing, it's also at genderatic.com. That's gender plus erratic without the extra .com. And did you want to say something about yourself, Ginkgo, or shall we take a caller?
Well, by way of context, maybe a few things. I am a gay man who was married and have a son and a grandson, Army veteran, and West Coast, and I think that's enough context for everyone. And after this, yes, I'll help out however I can.
Yeah, and again, thanks for coming on. It's great to have you. It's great to do something on air with you since we've been working for so long off the air.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, I'm gonna take on Vagabond. I'm gonna pull Vagabond on air.
Okay.
Hey, you're on air, Vagabond.
Thank you for having me back.
Oh, you're welcome. Did we? Could you refresh my memory if we had you on air recently?
Last Silent Lines show, we had a rant with about bronies, which I have another one prepared for you tonight. But we ran through damsel in distress and other things.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, definitely lay your rant on us.
Okay. Yeah. So again, thank you for having me back on. And yeah, I feel fairly dissatisfied with the way I sound on radio, so I plan to practice a little bit more on here. And so I had this rant about because bronyism, I suppose, is a pretty interesting topic all around. So.
Okay, just a second. Before you continue, I'm going to explain to the audience that bronies are the male fans of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, which presumably is a show aimed at young girls, but it actually does have a fairly adult subcontext. And I've watched quite a few episodes, and I can see what appeals because there's a significant quality to it that's more adult. So I just wanted to clarify that for people who in the audience who might not know what a brony is. But anyway, continue, Vagabond.
You are correct, ma'am. And well, here's my little thought on the matter. The question that came up in my head recently is, since it is a female show, here's the big question: is there misandry on My Little Pony? And by and large, I gotta say no, but I do find a little quirk on a character pretty interesting, and that is the curious case of Spike, who is Twilight's helper and helper pet friend kind of person. He's one of the very few prominent male characters on the show. He's male, and he's of a different species. Now, you can see other male horses in the story. They tend to be larger. They tend to be fairly a big build. They have square-cut chins. They carry lots of alpha male qualities. But their characters tend to be fairly two-dimensional, and you don't see too many of them. But I could be wrong. I haven't watched the whole of the series. I'm a fairly moderate fan. But some of the odd things that I find out about Spike are he has very outspoken and tends to have clumsy. He tends to be clumsy. He tends to pander a lot to female characters, in particular Rarity, which he's deeply in love with, but seems to be in the friend zone with. And the biggest telling thing about him that makes me question is the female view on him is in the movie Equestria Girls, where everyone gets represented by a human counterpart. He gets turned into a dog. So the question, is there any actual misandry on My Little Pony? As far as I can say, no, I don't think so, and I'm overanalyzing, but I do raise a few questions. I was wondering what your guys' view on those matters are.
I'll take that. I'm not sure if Ginkgo has a lot of experience with My Little Pony at all.
Well, I have some reaction to what he laid out so clearly.
Sure, go ahead.
I have a little bit from. I have a 30-year-old daughter who used to watch that. Well, when she was like 7 or 8, so you can do the math on that. But go ahead.
Well, the modern iteration is quite a bit better than the one that I also watched when I was 8. But it's an impressively improved story and characterization. But I do want to hear what your reaction was to what Vagabond laid out, Ginkgo.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, first off, he lays out a pretty clear. It's like a caste system, as he talks about. There's these alpha males that kind of get to. Basically, the way that he laid them out, they sound kind of like Chippendales, for the delectation of everyone else. And then the other character, the more beta guy, is purely an instrument. And this is really shown, when everybody else is turned into a human, he's turned into a dog. Well, you don't have to go any farther than that. It's all in the language. Dogs are completely dependent on humans. Dogs are completely subordinate to humans. Dogs basically have no more actual functional use. They're only kept around as toys, as living, breathing toys. So it's a completely subsidiary kind of position, and that is his that little bit there lays out the entire psychology of the situation. It lays it completely out.
I would actually say that's fairly honest, very accurate. I have problems with the Spike character. I think I'd be a lot more vocal about calling him actively misandrous. There was this particular, Ginkgo mentions him being used as an instrument. This whole concept of him belching out, Ginkgo, to explain the situation, Spike is the messenger of letters between the main female character and her princess mentor. And the way that these messages are transmitted is that he sort of belches out flame, and the message comes out of the flame. And there's this sequence in one of the cartoons in which the princess has been sending so many messages to the main female character, and Spike is constantly being used to vomit out these messages, that he's like exhausted and sick, and he's moaning. And not only does the main female character apparently show no concern for the fact that Spike is in obvious distress, but this is sort of a horrible way to to send letters? Like, do they never stop and consider maybe causing someone to vomit out a scroll every time you want to send a frickin' text? Might be a little bit twisted. And
well,
so it's like, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for bringing that to my attention. The idea of casting him and his communication as vomit is pretty derogatory. And of course, the idea of him being run back and forth as some kind of little rat tusk carrying messages is about as subsidiary as it gets, you know. And of course, there's the lack of concern. See, one of the things that you come across this in a lot of feminist spaces, and it's at the core of this poor men kind of thing, is there's an actual delight, sort of a sense of power in tormenting these supposedly powerful creatures. It's like someone beating a horse that depends on them for food. Well, how much of an expression of power is that? Yes, the horse outweighs you by 5 times, but it's completely dependent on you and can't think faster than you, and you have the upper hand. Completely. So it's a completely dishonest trope, but it seems to really, really juice up an awful lot of people's psyches.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if it's a situation where they're enjoying the torment of Spike. I mean, he's not running around to make these messages, but literally he's basically, and the reason why I said vomiting is because it was made very obvious that this seems to be like almost the form of like a stomach flu that he's enduring, because he has to these messages. I'm not, it's like magic physics. I don't know how it works, but essentially he belches out some flame and a message comes out, pops out of that. But It's made very obvious that this is a process that's uncomfortable if it happens constantly, and it's sort of akin to gagging and vomiting. And like I said, there seems to be absolutely no concern for Spike in this situation, and I just noticed that, and I was like, wow, this is sort of dark and twisted. But I
think there's concern. It's concern against him. The reason for putting it that way is it's actively enjoyed.
That makes it even more dark. I don't know if in a kids show they're going that dark, if they just don't care. But anyway, I want to get Vagabond just to come back on and say what you think about what we've talked about so far.
Well, the mention of that part in particular. Yeah, I've seen that episode where he does in a sense help Twilight snap back into her current mind, re-emotionalize herself through Spike's through the Princess Celestia's constant sending of message after lesson after lesson through Spike. In his position, he in a sense was used as the instrument to save the day. But I mean, looking back at it, that is true. There are several instances throughout the series where his pain is it's laughed at and it's practically ignored. And but I do get the feeling we may be overreaching. I'm definitely overreaching because I'm not the most hardcore fan. But from the things that I've been seeing, it's definitely worth looking into. I may be putting a little bit too much weight on it, but on the other hand, I'll say it again, it's definitely worth looking into.
Well, let me put it this way. When you're creating something that's supposed to be art and it's supposed to be an interesting narrative, you often overlook and just lazily use tropes. And it's not a situation where you're intentionally writing this kind of abuse into a story. It's a situation where you're just reaching for a lazy trope. But on the other hand, lazy tropes lead to lazy writing that lack artistic merit. So, I mean, if the writers, let's say theoretically, were listening to that, the fact that they're just using Spike like an instrument and they're not caring about his experience of being an instrument is illustrative of a blind spot in their writing. And you can make a much tighter story, a much more interesting story, if you are aware of your blind spots and you really think through them, and you stop seeing Spike as an instrument and actually seeing Spike as a character that deserves to have his concerns understood.
That is true. I do want to bring up the point that in order for me to keep enjoying the character, sometimes I do have to run over my own emotions, and in that scene in particular, I was looking at it in disgust, and in order for me to keep going through it I'd have to ignore that little irk of discomfort in order to keep watching that particular episode.
Well,
but that is a point, though.
For me, I actually have to sort of swallow another thing that I've noticed, and it relates to the instrumentality of Spike. I've noticed that essentially, although the story completely focuses on 6 female main characters, the world is functionally appears to be, and maybe it's just an accurate representation of reality, but the entire world's functioning seems to depend on male labor. Like wherever you look, every time there's a menial job, it's a male pony doing it. And the other thing is that there's lots of scenes in which male ponies are essentially being horses for female ponies, like pulling them around in carts, which is the weirdest thing. But and it's another thing that I think probably the creators just completely overlook. Although after a while, it starts to really undermine that message of self-reliance, female self-reliance in the story, when it seems like the entire society is run by male ponies.
Can I break in here a minute? You've brought up a couple of things that I want to react to before I forget them. What you're talking about there is it totally reinforces the whole princess complex. That's really, and I think that is the appeal of this show to young girls, is they get to identify with these ponies, these female ponies who are in fact princesses and who are treated like princesses, and who have this expectation that the males will treat them like princesses and that they can treat the males like house servants. And I think that's the appeal, really. Well, and I think it appeals from 6 years on. The second thing is that Vagabond, when you get these little clenches of disgust, you should listen to them, because what we just described there, I flashed on this. I remember reading something, I think in high school. It was a novel or an autobiography of a black guy who, and this is in sort of like as Jim Crow was falling apart. He was invited to take part in some kind of boxing competition, and he'd boxed a little bit in high school and whatever, and it turned out to be basically a show where 3 or 4 black guys fought with each other, surrounded by howling white men. One of the things that they did was they all flipped money onto the surface of the fighting ring, and then the boxers were allowed to jump in there and grab it. Well, the whole thing was electrified, so they're all bouncing around, and this just brought the house down. Okay, it's that kind of torment for the sake of humor and entertainment that we're talking about here. And it should be disgusting. And if it's not disgusting, what it's doing is desensitizing. And this show is desensitizing these little girls to male suffering.
Well, that's a very excellent point, actually.
Okay, I'm going to interject here and just to defend the show. I do think that this is a situation where these tropes need to be looked at much more carefully about what they're saying, not just because of the desensitization. Well, definitely, I mean, that's a good enough reason just on its own, but also because I don't think it's really presenting in a subliminal way the message that they're trying to present. Because if you have a society that's completely managed and run by male labor, then what kind of independent female agency are you really presenting?
Oh, yes, and it goes worse than that. It goes worse than that. Not only you're presenting it as empowerment. It's the big lie. You're totally dependent on this, but you're told that this is empowerment.
Yeah,
You know,
it,
certain illustration of that boxing match that you were talking about can be seen in the movie Django Unchained.
Okay, same thing. Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
I believe it was called Mandingo fighting. They're taking a bunch of muscular black men and throwing them at each other, encouraging to just rip meat off each other's bones until eventually one of them dies.
I hadn't heard that expression, but that sure sounds, and that sounds like something from slavery, and it sounds like this was a reenactment.
It is. It's pretty much the same thing. I mean, if even on the offset of the Jim Crow laws, they were doing that.
Yeah.
Oh boy, that leaves your heart in the pit of your stomach, you know.
Well, see, and here's the thing. There's this big lie about these female ponies living in a society powered entirely by male labor, and yet having it presented as empowerment. It's the same kind of inversion, sly inversion, that you see in feminist spaces where someone will make the comparison I made, and the sneer will come back. I can't believe you're equating blah 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 to Jim Crow, because they, privileged white women, have appropriated the victim status because that's their gender role. It's important in their gender role that they see themselves as victims. They don't have to be victims. It's better if they're not. In fact, it's much better if they are privileged above everybody else. And the more privileged they are, the more important it is to maintain this fiction of them being victims. And so that's where this sneering comes from. That's where all this grievance collecting comes from. That's where all this Princess and the Pea stuff about these minor little slights. Anita Sarkeesian thing. That's all Princess and the Pea, so that she can cast herself as a proper female victim.
Yeah, it's in relation to the story, I would not necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater. In my perfect world, the authors and the story writers would actually realize that this is sloppy writing, that you have to consider every aspect of your story and what it's saying, and you've essentially let something, you've essentially allowed something to go through that you haven't properly considered. Mm-hmm. And is this really the message you want to send? You know, I wouldn't like. I know that I'm going to continue to watch the story. I think the stuff that happens to Spike is mediated somewhat by the fact that Twilight Sparkle also goes through a lot of physical slapstick comedy. Like Twilight Sparkle's the main female character, and I've seen her fall flat on her face many times, fall into pits, get hit on the head with stuff, and it's played off for comedy. So there's a little bit of mediation in that.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think, Vagabond? Is there enough mediation with how Twilight Sparkle is sort of played off as a comedic slapstick sort of character?
Well, I mean, all in all, it's you know, being able to take the whole picture as is, because you know they do give the impression of perfect little princesses, but the one redeeming aspect of the show is that it brings you into their deeper minds and hearts, and actually shows you, hey, we're not you know, we're not perfect princesses. We fall over ourselves. You know, it's there you know, there are good lessons to be learned in particular about a woman being able to accept herself and all her quirks. Mm-hmm. But that's still, you know, it's not an elephant in the room, but it is a mouse in the room that you do have to pay attention to, in that, you know, are there those little, you know, tiny little crackers that you get every once in a while that help continue in a sense subliminal misandry in women's lives. I mean, that is a question that people have to ask. Yeah. I mean, the in defense of the writers, I don't think that they do that consciously, but I mean, you know, the cat's out of the bag. we have to consider these things in what we do.
Yeah. Well, I would say that.
Go ahead.
I would say that My Little Pony functions as a great. It's a good first stab at really tackling the idea of female agency. But it definitely needs to be refined and considered. All of these subsidiary, like they're you can sort of see that on the conscious level, their heart's in the right place, but there's still subconscious things that they're relying on that they haven't questioned, and they need to.
I'm reminded of that one, that T-shirt logo, boys are stupid, throw rocks at them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna have I've got another callers on the line, so I'm gonna have to say thanks for your rant. I think I would agree with Ginkgo. If you're feeling disgust or discomfort, you should pay attention to it and consider why.
Absolutely. One more quick thing that I actually this took a lot longer than I thought it would, but the actual question that I want to bring to the table.
Okay.
Look, I'm a MGTOW. I'm a man gone his own way, and I've fairly enough sworn off the world of toxic women. Basically, a self-absorbed world of feminism. But here's the thing. I do have a caveat on that. I wouldn't mind trying to get in a relationship with a Zeta feminine woman. But the thing is, the big question that has to be brought to the table, if that's even if this is even much of a possibility in the current world, what are my chances of running into one?
They're all over.
They're all over?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's Ginkgo.
Yeah. I have, my daughter-in-law is one of them. I have various friends, all ages. They're out there, but they're invisible if you're looking only at the alpha and the alpha females. They're invisible. But once you, and as you go through this MGTOW thing, as you become so, sort of stable and self-contained, and start able to direct your own gaze at what's out there, you'll start to see these people. And this is not unique to MGTOW. During my coming out process and learning how to do those kinds of relationships, I ended going into counseling. I was in love with just a really entrenched narcissist, and he had me completely under his spell. And my counselor said, "You know how many absolute princes you are ignoring because you're so caught up and fascinated with this one piece of fool's gold, that glitters and glitters." He says, he said, first off, you don't recognize your own value compared to him. But on top of that, there are all these other people out there that would be wonderful for you that you are completely ignoring. They're invisible to you. That's what will happen. But once you finally get that break, that clarity, that sort of that distance between you and this other frenzy that you've described, they're out there. They're all over the place. And they're wondering, they're wondering why nobody notices them.
Well, I guess the big question that should be asked is then, are there signposts?
That's what you learn, I guess. And that's something you need. I'm not in a position to help you on that. And, the money you spend on counseling, honestly, is well spent. And it doesn't have to go on for very long. Sometimes it only takes 3 or 4 sessions, just like pop some awareness. The awareness has been building, and all it needs is the membrane scratched off of it, and bang, it's there. So, okay, Typhon, you wanted...
Okay, I'll go forward with what I think might be helpful. I think Ginkgo is right. Generally, you have to look where other people aren't. But you can still, the thing is that it's not just alpha women. There can be some really bitchy beta women who are not worth your time either. Oh, first of all, I would say that, you know, beauty is really, like the whole physical appearance of women completely changes if you take the makeup off, right? So that's something to consider. That if you see someone who's brightly colored, there's a reason why, and you know, other things that are brightly colored in nature are usually poisonous. What I would suggest looking for is someone who is capable of taking responsibility. If she's fairly young, she'll probably be rough around the edges because we are all rough around the edges when we're young. But if she's capable of saying, yeah, I did that and that's bad and I need to take steps to make it better, then you can probably end up with a decent relationship with her. It's really down to that. Just see, does she take responsibility for herself?
Oh boy, it's a minefield because, you know, when we're starting to talk about the age game is you know, what's left down at the other end of the pool when a guy doesn't starts to feel like he doesn't want to get married anymore, you know. Navigating that pool of women that are basically tired of running around it's pretty iffy. I mean,
then you look for the ones that aren't hostile and bitter.
Yeah,
that's the next step.
I know.
And then the next step, the final step, is ones that can show real empathy, and then you're basically there.
I mean, yeah, that's the big thing because usually what I find in common, in particular with you honey badgers, is you did come in contact with something that actually brought to light a male pain, you know.
Yeah.
And it brought to light that, look, this person is just as human as me, and you know, male pain and male disposability is not a joke, and I need to consider that in my relationship with another man, and I need to consider that with my relationship with basically another human being.
Mm-hmm.
But
can I speak to that? And I promptly forgot what I was going to say.
Well, do you want to? You mentioned that you had callers waiting, and they're not going to wait forever.
Yeah.
I will respond to what you've just said, Vagabond, and then I do have to move on, as Ginkgo has pointed out. I don't think it's a situation where something just sort of hit me on the head and it came out from outside myself. The reality is that every woman on the earth had experience of witnessing male pain. It's not a situation where I was jarred out of it by witnessing male pain. It's that I was receptive to seeing the vulnerability of men. And you need to find. I mean, if you want to have a relationship with a woman, you don't have to. And if it sounds like you're taking steps to see yourself as valuable without a relationship with a woman, or you're already there. But if you're looking for that, it's not that this woman has gone through this mystical experience of witnessing male pain, but that she's actually open to seeing it, because otherwise she won't. Because I guarantee every woman on earth has seen it.
Okay.
Yeah, but,
I'll let you get on with the show because there are people waiting. But definitely thanks for bringing me on again, and it's been, once again, a very interesting conversation.
Oh, you're welcome. Definitely call again. Thanks for the rant, and thanks for the question.
Thanks.
Now I'm going to go to Night Runner, who's been waiting patiently for a very long time. Night Runner, you're on the air.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm, as most of you know, I drive a truck. I'm very close to the headquarters of the SPLC right about now, so I'd like to give them a big fuck you. Anyway, as I was listening to the conversation that you were having earlier with those two guys about looking for a One of them is looking for a Zeta female. And the best advice I can give any guy who is wanting to get into a relationship with a woman is, if you think that a woman would be a good partner in a relationship, step back just a second. Remove the fact that she's a woman. Remove the fact that that you're sexually attracted to her, and look at strictly her personality and pretend that she's a guy. If you're, this will work if you're a straight guy. And pretend she's a guy for a minute. Is that guy a person that you'd want to hang out with every day? If he's not, then run. And that's pretty, I guess, a pretty good test.
Caller, this is Ginkgo. First off, that's an absolutely solid test. It's gender equalitarian. That's a good thing there too. I can see it from the other side. I have 2 close female friends. I don't have the slightest sexual attraction to them, but if I had even any, I'd go for them because of the quality of person they are and their personality and their character. And I mean integrity and loyalty and all that kind of thing. I think the same standards apply across the board for all relationships, period.
Yeah, it's just when we're looking at a romantic relationship or a sexual relationship, that clouds our judgment a lot of times. Mm-hmm. And you've got to step back and remove the sexual and romantic aspect of it and look at it, because I've been in a relationship for 15 years now. And after a while, the I'm not going to say the lust dies, but it's not as important. Mm-hmm. It's not the driving force. You have to be able to be friends. Yeah. It's going to work, because when the sexual intensity is not there as much as what it once was, there's got to be something else to the relationship, or it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's true of a relationship. Any sexual relationship.
Well, this is my experience, and what you're talking about, the romance clouding it. Falling in love is the formation of a bond that's almost as close as a parent-child bond. It's a very deep chemical bond. It's endocrine when it happens, and it changes your mind. It changes the structure of your brain the same way that PTSD changes the structure of your brain. It's a physical change. Okay, so you have to take that into account. Now, you can love your child unconditionally, but you still have standards for how they behave. And people cut their kids loose, and they cut their parents loose when it goes far enough. There are some things that just make a relationship impossible. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that once that's there, as you say, the physical attraction may wane, but the emotional attraction increases. The lust turns into this driving tenderness that is as strong an attractive force as the lust ever was. Yeah. So that's my experience.
Yeah, it's really kind of goes beyond words of how much you can grow together with someone to the point where it's almost like you're the same person.
People joke about finishing each other's sentences and stuff like that, but pretty soon you get each other's facial expressions. Yeah. You know what the other one's thinking. Yeah. You know how they're going to react most of the time, and it just, once the relationship gets to that point, it becomes really, really comfortable. It's like an old pair of shoes that is just really comfortable, and my wife and I can sit and watch television for hours and not say 2 words to each other. We're just happy being in the same room together. Don't you remember a song from about 10 or 15 years ago? You speak loudest when you say nothing at all. And I cannot remember. It wasn't George Strait, but it was somebody like that.
Yeah, it It was a female artist, and I can't remember her name, but yeah, I remember the song.
Okay. Well, the way I heard it was a male artist, but it could have been her song. You know what I'm talking about? A cover.
Yeah, or one covered the other one, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
That is the one of the most sickening things about everything that's going on in gender relations. A relationship can be such a positive force in someone's life.
Yeah.
And because of the legal system, it's really a smart guy would say no to marriage or cohabitating with a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And that is sad beyond words.
Well, it is sad. I mean, it's wonderful when it works out organically on its own, of itself. And you'll hear this, well, why do you need to change the laws? Can't you just trust, can't you just trust? Well, yes, you can when that person is trustworthy. But we don't have laws because people are trustworthy. We have laws because to protect us against the ones that aren't, and to remedy the situations that arise when people aren't trustworthy. And so we shouldn't have to rely on the other person's good character all the time, because even the best person is going to fail now and then, and there needs to be a remedy.
The reality is that a woman who's worth trusting wouldn't want that kind of situation in the first place. It would be it would be a repugnant that to have to live in a situation where I know Diana has said that she would not live with a man because she is repulsed by the idea that the Canadian legal system essentially turns men into women's slaves.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, and it's profoundly unfair in Saskatchewan, where a woman can allege domestic violence and get him thrown out of his house and have his assets seized. It's like that is essentially slavery, and it's repulsive. Any woman who is worth trusting wouldn't want a man in that situation in the first place.
It's exactly analogous to a situation where a man could have a woman torn out of her home on an allegation of insanity. It's no different. We talk about how easy it was for a woman in pre-revolutionary France to divorce her husband. All she had to do was allege and have him fail to refute a charge of impotence, and she was. Not because her sexual pleasure mattered, but she was entitled to children from him. Okay? Well, that legal arrangement's only half of the issue. The other half of the issue was that in the classes where any of this really mattered, the husband ruled the house because it had come down to him through his family. He controlled the household staff. And if he didn't like his wife, if she was just too difficult, he'd just have her locked up and starved. You didn't have to divorce her. Divorce was like the legal balancing, but this is the situation that you describe in Saskatchewan. Believe me, it's not limited to that province. It's general through a lot of the states. Violence Against Women Act basically mandates that kind of legal regime. States may or may not enact it as fully as the federal law envisions, but it's still hanging there. Basically, it's no different from just saying, well, she's crazy and drag her off to an asylum, or lock her up and starve her in a closet.
Yep. Well, although that was a little bit mediated as well, but it's a situation. But again, it's a situation where you shouldn't have to have that much trust. A person who's trustworthy would say, you know what, that's an unacceptable level of trust. I don't want that kind of power. Why would I want a relationship predicated on us not being equals?
Yep.
I want a relationship of equals. I don't want a relationship where I have these kind of legal and social powers over my partner. That's repulsive.
If you're supposed to just trust someone like that, why have DV laws?
Yeah.
And another thing, a woman who is going to, throw a man out on a DV charge just because she can, just to get his stuff, she's not going to glow purple. She's not going to have a sign over her head. And Some people may call me a misogynist for saying this, but I really don't give a fuck. Women can manipulate and trick a man for years, decades, and then finally one day bring the trap on him, and he'll never see it coming.
I'll tell you why it's not misogynist, because men can do exactly the same thing, but generally the legal system doesn't support the same horrific consequences. But I had one of my closest friends. It's a long story, and it's her story, so it's not really for public consumption. But she was a trusting, decent, upright, person of good integrity, and basically expected this person to be this way, and it was just not like that. And people put on an awful lot of shine when they're trying to develop a relationship.
Yeah, but like you said, it's a situation where the law should be protecting people. It shouldn't it shouldn't be a force multiplier for these kinds of sociopaths who are capable of disguising themselves. It should be protecting men from them. It should be functioning to protect men from being acted upon by women who are insane and violent, and yet it doesn't.
There's that's the legal side of it, but as you say, sociopathic. If you went down through the sort of the standard, the modern version of the traditional female role in the Anglosphere, one of the problems that a man has in distinguishing the sociopaths from the healthy people is that the role itself mimics sociopathy so closely that anyone who is just gender conforming is going to come across as, it just gets it's normalized to the point where it becomes background noise and you don't think of it. You'd never tolerate this shit from a man.
Well, okay, and we're getting really close to the end of the show, so I'm gonna have to move on to the final bit. I have to agree with you, Ginkgo. The idea that women are solely acted upon leads to a gender role in which they abdicate responsibility for what they do, and that is sociopathic. It's encouraging sociopathy, and I want to thank Knight Rider for your call and for everything you contributed to the show.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. Every time you call in, and please do call in again. And I also want to thank Ginkgo for joining me. It's been great to try out a bit of on-air stuff with you tonight.
Yeah.
After 2 years of blogging with you. It's been great to hear you and interact with the guests with you. And I also want to thank Della, who's been doing some great work in the back room.
Bless you, Della.
You can't actually hear her because she's talking to people off air, but she's been holding down the fort doing that while I've been on air playing stuff and talking to people who want to talk on air and tell everybody what they're about. And I want to thank James, who's also been manning the chat and manning part of the back room. And I want to thank Phil and Europa for always doing our artwork and animations every week, and A Voice for Men for providing the platform. Again, A Voice for Men is doing their winter fundraiser, so please go to avoiceformen.com and donate if you have an extra $1 or $2. And finally, I want to thank you, the listener, for caring about what we have to say and coming out every week to hear it. So it's that time again, that time to say good night and to say...
This is Honey Badger Radio, reminding you to take the red pill.